Welcome to Construct Tech TV, and I'm Peggy Smedley. You will notice we are taking a slightly different approach to Construct Tech TV. All across our mediums, we are going to be focusing on what I call a three-legged stool. We're covering infrastructure, labor, and technology. As we have for almost 2 years now, we are going to continue to address how infrastructure needs to be rebuilt and concerns related to why infrastructure is failing. However, I think it's time we take a deeper dive at how people-first projects are dominating global agendas and how they are influencing the planning of infrastructure priorities. But that's not all. We need to examine who are the laborers who will reconstruct and build our national roads, bridges, dams, waterways, you name it. How will the worker of the future be enticed to enter the construction firms rather than enticed to go work for, let's say, Google or Amazon or Uber, you name it? What is the skilled laborer seeking when it comes to automation? Who is going to be the fierce advocates for the worker of construction? Well, we're going to tell you all about that. And as we have always done for the past 20 years, we will identify how technology innovation factors into all of these challenges. And it starts today. Throughout this entire episode, we will narrow in on the economics of the construction industry. Now, many of you might remember I wrote the book called Mending Manufacturing back in 2004. In it, I suggest that domestic manufacturers still have some ways to go to fully comprehend the crisis in manufacturing. And I believe construction companies still have a ways to go to understand the crisis in construction as well. We are on the precipice of a change that is impacting nearly every construction company across the globe. First, we have the general economic state to consider. The Producer Price Index for inputs to construction industries has been on the rise for the past years. In fact, we have seen it jump 8.1% between July of 2017 and July of 2018. At the same time, we are also facing a labor crisis. 1 in 4 employers currently says filling skilled trade jobs is harder this year than it was last year. In Q2 2018, 79% of contractors report a steady or increasing backlog. If we don't have the labor, how are we going to build all these complex projects? Too often, we are seeing delays on bids because we simply don't have the manpower. We sit here and we talk about it. How are we going to reach the people, the younger generations? But quite frankly, it just doesn't seem to be working what we're doing. The solution comes in the form of innovation. In my book, Mending Manufacturing, I suggest that in order to sustain growth, manufacturers need to spark new and innovative methods to grow their operations. Again, the same can be said for the construction industry. We need innovative methods in order to address the rising material costs and the shrinking labor force. It's easy to say innovation and technology are the solution, but it is the doing that is the difficult thing. And there are still many challenges to address. I don't want to gloss over any of these here today, but one of the biggest challenges is cost. It's the yin and the yang. Technology can help solve the skilled labor challenge and the shortage and the rising material costs by making our workers more efficient, but too often it's just too expensive. As a result, cost makes adopting technology out of reach. This is where construction and manufacturing can come together. For instance, prefab allows the assembling of components in a factory and then delivered to the site where the structure is to be located. The amount of work on prefabricated buildings has almost tripled between 2010 and 2016. Reports also show that contractors are looking to double their labor investments in prefabrication in the next 5 years. The challenge is many companies are still trying to figure this all out. In many cases, prefabrication processes are ineffective or need improvement. Much like the BIM conversation we had many years ago, more than 15 to be exact, it all needs to start with how we change the process. Construction is an industry that has worked the same for centuries, but now with rising costs and a shortage of workers, it's time for something that needs to change. We need to rework our industry from the inside out. I would like to leave you with this one final thought. Simply, now is the perfect time for the construction industry to create its own tribe. We love that word tribe these days. The key to success is by working together as a true community. This is so true in construction. Uncertainty is rife. Political and social agendas are changing rapidly. So to help with more transparency and investor diversity and so much more, we will bring together experts to examine the economic challenges and opportunities for construction. We will explore what is holding construction back and what it takes from funding as opposed to finance in order to develop and to heighten awareness and strategic approaches to move the industry forward. We will address the impact of tariffs, imports, exports, and the localization in construction. I will talk with the experts about the labor shortage and the material costs. I will broach the topic of economics and the cost of accidents on your projects. Let's create those building blocks for the future of innovators. This is the conversation that we will discuss, debate, and challenge our guests. I will be your fierce advocate for construction. My hope is we will develop some concrete solutions and how your company can build a better workforce through technology. You're watching Construct Tech TV, your fierce advocates for construction. Next, I would like to focus on the economics and emotions of job site safety. We all know there is a huge social cost to a job site accident. Let's narrow in on the economic cost of an accident, and it's a big one. Workplace injuries and illnesses have a major impact on an employer's bottom line. OSHA estimates that employers pay almost $1 billion per week for direct workers' compensation costs alone, and this is just one direct cost. We also see medical expenses for costs for legal services weighing businesses down, and this doesn't even account for lost time and productivity. The really scary thing is that accidents happen more often than any of us even think. The National Safety Council says every 7 seconds a worker is injured on the job. But this is preventable if we take the right actions. One company decided it isn't going to just talk about safety, it's going to do something about it. John Parker, Vice President of Elzinga Volkers, shared with me how he is turning a paradigm shift upside down.
Well, I think it started with finding the right employees. We found some really great people that buy into the program, and we have leadership here at the company that buy in from the top down. So we never question an expense or a program when it's directly related to safety. I think the second thing that we did is we really turned, I think, the paradigm upside down. Most companies will look at enforcement first, and we look at emotion first. So we try to tap into why are we trying to work safe? Why are we trying to keep our trade contractors and our employees safe? And then enforcement becomes second after we start with that emotional touch.
This company is succeeding while many aren't. Why? Elzinga Volkers is paying off with emotion. Yes, it is doing its regular training, but it's also getting buy-in from both employees and leadership. But it is doing it with the emotion piece, and this is unique, and it's delivering results. What I like about the emotion piece of this, it's doing something different than other companies. Let's take a look at one example of how the company is doing this.
Every year we do our safety week, which maybe we can talk about. We've done a children's coloring contest. So we'll go out to all our trades on a particular job and say, hey, take this, this 11 by 17 piece of paper home to your kid and have them draw a picture about why they want you to come home safe. And we'll get pictures back of, fathers and sons playing baseball, daughters, liking to get read to at night before they go to bed. We'll take those signs, laminate them, and put them up in the job trailer. So if you can envision that sign that's in every job trailer with all the rules, and then right next to it are a bunch of kids' drawings of why we work safe every day. Totally different message and totally different impact. We've gotten a great response from our trade partners and our employees alike.
Kind of a neat idea, right? A different spin on traditional safety practices. But I think what is really important is delivering results, and results matter. The company has celebrated 4,000 days of no lost time from any construction-related incidents. That is huge, especially considering the point that I made earlier. The National Safety Council says every 7 seconds a worker is injured on the job. Elzinga Volkers is seeing a number of other benefits as well, and that is having a direct impact on its bottom line. Let's take a look.
A good safety culture on a job site drives everything. So if you're working safe, we see higher quality, higher productivity, cleaner job sites, more efficient job sites. So it's a great leading indicator for us as a contractor when we're vetting out different trade partners to work with, or if we're talking to a client about potentially doing their project. How much do they value safety? Because if they value it really high like we do, we know we're going to have a really good job.
When it comes right down to it, safety is an economic factor in construction, and that is something your company needs to consider. Perhaps there's an opportunity to think outside the box, and Elzinga Volkers has. Throughout this entire episode, I've been talking about the economics of construction, specifically about how labor and tariffs are changing and the impact it is having on the construction industry. Now I would like to invite an expert to join me on the show. He has spent 35 years as a cost engineer and an estimating executive in the construction industry. Now he spends his time as a construction economics analyst, author, and educator. Here to chat with me about the economics of construction is Ed Zarenski. Ed, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
So Ed, let's talk about the economic forecast and what's been going on in construction. There's been a lot been happening. We've had a lot of ups and downs, and we seem to be going through a really good period. Is that going to continue? What's your forecast on it right now?
My forecast is that it will continue. We did have some ups and downs last year. For instance, non-residential building only had a 1% gain, but this year I'm anticipating a 6% gain. And overall, I think construction this year will finish at 1.3 billion, 1.33 billion. That would be 1.33 trillion, not billion. Geez, that would be a mistake. Anyway, 7% gain in construction this year overall. And that gain this year is led by non-building infrastructure, which is nice because they've been the laggard for the last few years.
When I think about that, when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about residential housing, we talk about all these things, what is actually impacting that? Because we talk about roads, bridges, dams. Are those the things that are impacting the growth when you say infrastructure? Because that's what we talk about, infrastructure. Is that what you're talking about in this forecast?
Yes. So infrastructure will include transportation facilities such as airports, all roads and highways, power plants, sewage treatment plants, water facilities. The biggest gainer this year in infrastructure projects is transportation, and that's predominantly in rail and airports. There has been such a large growth in new construction starts in the last year and a half, particularly the airport facilities that have, there's been 10 to 15 billion dollars worth of new construction starts in airport facilities, and those projects will continue for the next 4 to 8 years in some cases. Rail facilities, railway improvements also had some big starts last year, and those also will continue for several years. So we will see growth in infrastructure for the next few years.
But what's contributing to that? I mean, we have government dollars putting into these facilities, airports, rails. Where's that money coming from? Because if you listen to all those people in Washington right now, and they're all fighting it out, and we've got a political year right now, and whether it's going to be the Dems or the Republicans, whatever's going to happen, everybody's saying we don't have the dollars to put into infrastructure. You have a president who wants to put $1 trillion into it, but we have nobody who wants to put that money there. So where's that money coming to build these new airports, to build these new rails, all these things? I mean, we know we have a problem in infrastructure. The ASCE gave us a D+. It's a failing infrastructure, but where's the money coming from?
Not all infrastructure is public money. A lot of the infrastructure money that we see coming in is private money. Some of the money that's coming in for new transportation facilities was through programs that were approved a few years ago, and there's still money coming into those programs. But we see a lot of private money coming into.
So you're saying we need more to make some of this work. We need more public and private partnerships, because that's the only way this is going to happen, and that's how a lot of this new construction is actually happening right now.
I agree with that. Yes, if we do see on the horizon, whether it's this year or next year or the following, an infrastructure development program from the government, we should expect to see potentially another $10 to $20 billion a year in development money rolling into infrastructure. We really can't absorb more than that into the industry because we just don't have the capacity in the industry to absorb more than that. So
why don't we have the capacity to absorb that? Are we saying because we don't have the resources, the labor? What is it that is not going to enable that?
So infrastructure growth over historically has never been over $25 billion a year, and that would account for, and more importantly, I think infrastructure is only about 15 to 20% of all construction, public infrastructure. So construction being $1 trillion or $1.3 trillion, if you look at total public infrastructure being only 15% of that, it's really a very small piece of the pie. For every $1 billion of investment in infrastructure construction, that adds about 5,000 jobs a year. So spending $10 billion in a year adds 50,000 jobs. Infrastructure sector of construction has never grown by more than 50,000 jobs in a year.
But we have a labor problem. We have a labor problem right now. We've got a 2.3 million shortage on labor, right? I mean, that's what we've been talking about construction. Don't we need to be addressing that, or we're not even going to get these jobs done? Here's
an interesting thing about labor and construction. While everybody is reporting that we have shortages in labor and construction, and if they could hire more people, there would be more, they would be able to put more on the books. Labor has been growing faster than the dollar volume of work is growing, and we've been growing for the last 6 years at the second fastest rate in history.
So there's a disconnect in the way they're looking at these numbers and the way we're actually analyzing jobs, construction, and labor and putting all these numbers together. And we're really not looking at it accurately, is what you're just telling me.
I would say that's correct. One of the things that we see is that the growth in labor follows the growth in spending. If spending increases 5 to 6% a year, labor doesn't grow 5 to 6% a year, but it grows at a reasonably comparable rate. What people don't take into consideration is if spending grows at 5 to 6%, but inflation's 5%, the real volume in construction only increased by 1%.
Hey, Ed, we're out of time, but I have to tell you, I love this conversation. I hope you'll come back and share more of your time with us.
Thanks, Peggy.
In August, President Trump increased the Section 232 tariff rate on this steel from 25% to 50% on imports of steel articles from the Republic of Turkey. It seems everyone has an opinion on this subject. Here to tackle this issue is Bernard Markstein, President and Chief Economist from Markstein Advisors. Bernie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on.
So, Bernie, let's get right to it. Let's talk about trade. Everybody has an opinion. Is trade good or bad?
Essentially, trade, as long as it's free trade or uncoerced trade, it's good. If you think about, just as a simple example, when you were a child and you and a friend or a sibling gathered candy, and you had a certain candy you didn't like, and they had a candy they didn't like, but you each liked the other, you might trade. And you both were better off because you got rid of the candy you didn't like, and the other person got rid of the candy they didn't like, and you got the ones you like. And that's really, on a very simple level, is what trade is all about, as long as it's free trade. Now, if my older brother or sister grabs a hold of me and twists my arm and says, I want that chocolate, I want that piece of chocolate, and you give it up, that's not free trade. Or that's certainly not uncoerced trade.
So let's get to the point. If trade then is good, why is there so much controversy right now and everybody squabbling about all this trade?
Well, the problem is that when you start talking about trade, first of all, in the real world, it gets more complicated because it's not just you and your friend or you and your sibling. It's you and the whole neighborhood and other neighborhoods. And plus, we get money involved in this. So when we start talking about the whole world, even though it's still simply nobody would trade if it wasn't better. But what does happen in economics is that it can be better for a lot of people, but the benefit is spread out over those people, whereas the people who are hurt, going back in the old days, if you think back to when the U.S. used to make a lot of clothing, which tends to be labor intensive, when the clothing began to move abroad, particularly, for example, athletic shoes, the people who were involved in those industries were hurt, and they make a louder noise than the few people who happen to get athletic shoes at a store for $1 or $2 less.
So how we get into this trade discussion with tariffs, because right now everybody's screaming, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, somebody's got an opinion on it. So talk to me about the trade and the tariff situation and how they come together.
Well, what happens, first of all, let me explain quickly what a tariff is. A tariff is simply a tax on a good, and it's imports. So it's a particular tax, but it's a tax, and it's paid.
Nobody likes a tax. Nobody likes a tax, right? Well, it depends on what side are you on, right?
Yeah, we don't like taxes, but all of a sudden tariffs somehow are a good tax. I hate to be too critical of the administration, but quite simply, we have, I hate to point fingers, but we have a president who simply, quite frankly, doesn't seem to understand trade. First of all, he sees trade as a...
wait a minute. Now, when you let's talk about that. When you say a president doesn't understand this, let's talk about what we have, because we're talking about right now what we're trying to do. The economy is doing the best it's ever done. So if you're going to pick on the president right now, you better look at what the economy is doing, because I understand we're talking about tariffs on steel and aluminum, and construction accounts for 43% of the aluminum. And I know what you're going to get to in this, but only 1% of that is ever used on an actual construction project at the time, right? I mean, that's what we're getting to. And I know there's a lot of opinions.
I'm going to have to take issue for a couple of things. We have a very good economy, not the best ever. It's just a very good economy, and little of that, and a lot of that, not all of it, has to do with what went before.
Now, people are going to challenge you with you. I mean, because I know our former president's going around telling everybody it started from him. Now, other people will challenge that point too, right?
Every president claims they are responsible for good economies, and they also are quick to shed the blame if the economy goes bad. In essence, yes, the president and some of the policies they have impact the economy, but not to a large extent. They inherit a lot. The Federal Reserve has a lot to do with it. There's a lot of moving parts, both to the economy over time, but definitely to a modern economy. Now, my problem with the president is that his view is not very nuanced when it comes to trade. He sees everything in terms of bilateral terms, when in fact trade is multilateral, meaning that there's a lot of different people involved in different countries and moving parts. I'm sure a number of people have seen the stories about automobiles, how many parts go between the United States, between the United States and Mexico, and between the United States and Canada.
But is it impacting construction right now? I mean, I want to know, is construction's booming better than ever? So that's what we're here to talk about. I mean,
Okay.
you and I can get on a debate about politics, and I don't want to get on that because I really want to talk about, is construction and are we seeing positive things happening? You and I can come back on the show and debate all that because
Sure.
I don't ever want to get on the politics, but I do want to understand how tariffs are impacting construction right now. And are we seeing that or not? And what do contractors need to do to shore up to keep seeing these boom times that they're experiencing?
Well, the simple fact is, yes, they are affecting it. Starting with housing, single-family housing, there's an earlier tariff on softwood lumber, which comes largely from Canada. We get a lot of softwood lumber from Canada, and according to the National Association of Home Builders, a group I used to work for a number of years ago, they estimate that the cost of a single-family house has increased by almost $9,000 from 2017 due to softwood lumber alone. That's just one major component. Now, for other projects, when you start talking about non-residential construction, they're less dependent on softwood lumber, but things like steel and aluminum do impact it. We've seen steel prices, according to the Producer Price Index, go up by roughly 20% over the last year. Aluminum prices are up about 13%, again, over the last year. Now, not all that, we have to understand that construction has picked up. First of all, I would say that construction is doing well, but not great. We are still lagging to a large extent. There's a lot more we need to do. Residential constructed housing is definitely.
So are you still saying we've got an outlook that we need to be cautious about? Because despite the boom, you know, we talk about we've got a 2.3 million, you know, shortage in labor. That's going to be a problem. But do we have to kind of hedge our bets right now, even though we're talking about it's a good time in construction? You're still saying, hey, there's still some rough areas out there right now. Is that what you're telling us as an economist?
Definitely. But I am positive about construction in general. Let me make that clear. That overall, my outlook for construction is good. And as long as the economy continues to expand, which I think we're good for another year or two, definitely. But we're throwing some barriers in our way, and the trade is one of the major stumbling blocks that's in the way. And it is definitely, we are seeing some projects that are either being scaled back or canceled because of higher building material prices directly linked to tariffs.
Have we seen that, though? Have we really seen the tariffs taking effect, or is it the threat of tariffs? I mean, I know that you can be held up, projects can be held up. We've seen what that can be done when things don't get to where they need to be for a project. But have we really seen some real significant delays as of that, as of right now?
At this point, most of what we're seeing is anecdotal. We are hearing stories of projects being canceled. I just was reading a story that in Seattle, they're scaling back and canceling some projects. I've seen in other areas, particularly in highway projects, because there's a lot of steel that goes into that, maybe more so than some other non-residential projects. Again, you have to be a little careful when you talk about these in terms of the amount of a particular material that goes into a project. And again, higher prices on one item is not going to alone kill a project. But when you start putting that together with other problems, it just weighs down on construction in general.
So looking at it right now, looking what you see as the future, you know, if you had to make some numbers, looking at predictions, what would you say? As economists, you probably don't like to make those, but what are you seeing?
Well, I am still reasonably positive on construction, but it's only growing a little faster than inflation. And a lot depends on the economy, the general economy. I understand you kind of cut me off on general trade policy, which I don't blame you. It does get pretty sticky, but that is one of the issues that the economy is facing: shortages of labor, which may be just because we're not paying more. So as we pay more, we're going to see more. We possibly see more inflation, which means higher interest rates, which could tip us into a recession.
Bernie Markstein, President and Chief Economist at Markstein Advisors, thank you so much for joining us for today. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome, and it was a pleasure talking with you, Peggy.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. Today's word of the day is tariffs. Now, I probably do not need to tell you that a tariff is a tax on imports or exports. What I do want to share with you today are 5 facts you might not know about tariffs. Now, the first tariff law was passed by the U.S. Congress was the Tariff Act of 1789. Now, it gets really interesting because it was designed to raise revenues for the new government by placing a tariff on the importation of foreign goods. Now, at that time, it averaged more than 8%. And it also encouraged domestic production in industries like glass and pottery by taxing the importation of those products. So tariffs did provide a significant economic growth. The second fact I want to share with you today is that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act took effect in 1930. Now, I had no idea what this was, but in doing some research, I found out that it raised import duties to protect American businesses and farmers. Now, this added considerable strain to the international economic climate of the Great Depression. Now, jump forward to today, and the U.S. has a $337 billion deficit with China, while the U.S. runs a surplus with only a few countries. Now, at the same time, the U.S. is leading exporter of services. Now, think about all of these things. Now, I talk a lot about much of this in my book, Mending Manufacturing. While I addressed the crisis in American manufacturing before it became the crisis that it is today, I think there's a lot to be learned. But the last and perhaps the most important fact I would like to share with you today is about tariffs, is the fact that it is impacting what? Our construction industry. We see that tariffs can lead to an increase in material prices. This causes construction companies to squeeze bids even tighter. And there aren't a lot of margins, right, when we talk about construction. So this, combined with the skilled labor shortage, is nearly bankrupting construction companies. Throughout history, we see tariffs have always had a big impact on our economy. Hopefully, on this episode, we will have given you some real tangible insights into the economics of construction and what you need to know to move forward. Tariffs. That's your word of the day. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching Construct Tech TV, where we are your fierce advocates for construction.